Hello, hello, hello. My name is Robert. I am the recovery guy, and you have entered into The Fix. Hello. Thank you so much for rejoining Recovery Guy Podcast. We are excited to be here, and I'm excited about my personal recovery. I'm excited about yours and what you're doing in your life. There's so much going on today, not only from a social dynamic with the coronavirus, but even in our own personal introspective lives and how we're finding our way through this maze of social shifting and how that translates to us. I can tell you, whether you're 8 days, 8 months, 8 years, in my case, I'm coming up on 34 years today, and I love a good round number. Today is 12,400 days, 12,400 days of continual sobriety. And it just blows my mind that just the 25th of this month, I will celebrate 34 years of continual sobriety. I first came into recovery, into treatment in February of 1986, and I would relapse after 71 days and come back to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the fellowship of what I needed to do to get well one day at a time. And now, today, 12,400 days later, here I am, you and me, chatting about what's going on, how we can elevate our wellness, that we would then be a greater impact and influence in the lives of other people. And nowadays, with everything going on, the social changes and some of the things and the adjustments that we have to make, we just need to be a little bit more creative in terms of how we approach each other and what we approach each other with, and see if there's anything shifting in the tide of what we need to do to become well. And I think from a social dynamic, there truly is. And so we're going to address some things along the way, but primarily we are a principle-centered person. And that is what we become as a person of recovery. We're no longer swayed by opinion of either our own self-image or how we believe others are viewing us. We were a people without principle, without guidelines, without a code that we lived by, and everything was based on the moment, the now, what I was feeling, what I wasn't feeling, how I could medicate away from that pain. Or if you weren't addicted to a substance, then what kind of behavior could I become involved with in my journey to sort of forget about where I'm at? As many of you know, if you haven't listened to much of my story, I actually came to through Gamblers Anonymous before I ever went to an AA meeting, because I was a compulsive gambler as well. I was addicted to pornography, alcohol, drugs. I was a compulsive overeater. I'd become bulimic and was binging and purging throughout the course of my day. And of course, I had such a gambling problem living in Las Vegas the way that I did. So there's so many things that even after, if we are addicted to a substance, even after that substance goes away, we still need to apply rules and principles to our recovery. You know, something that I heard a long time ago, and again, if you know me well and listen to me much, you'll know that I'm a big fan of the late, great Dr. Stephen Covey. Principle-centered leadership, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, First Things First, an inside-out approach to quality and change. So much of the the movement, the quality movement that Dr. Covey and Deming were involved with. But one of the quotes I had heard from Stephen years ago in my early listening of him was a quote by a sociologist, Emile Durkheim. And if you ever want to find someone who's very, very fascinating, Emile Durkheim might be someone for you. Dr. Durkheim was a French sociologist, and he was actually considered the father of sociology. He would analyze how different aspects of society together were formed as a whole. So how the pieces form the whole. And just as he would do that, I think more specifically, a lot of the things that he would lecture and published from his sociological studies, education, crime, again, all from a sociological standpoint, how these types of things affected society as a whole. But again, crime, education, religion, suicide, and other aspects of society. Well, you might say, how does that affect me as a person of recovery? Well, what is addiction if it's not a type of suicide? Let's look at it. Let's call it what it is, right? I might want to say that I was alcoholic, I was a drug addict, I was a compulsive eater, but I don't want to look at myself as a person who was subject to suicide. But now that I know more about my disease, my dis-ease, right? And how I wanted to isolate and separate in some of the behaviors I was involved in, depending upon your addiction, often determines what is being killed. So there's a form of suicide because it's self-inflicted, and we're the ones engaged in the behavior. So again, depending upon your addiction, often determines on what is being killed if our behavior is not arrested. The addiction or behavior, it's going to cause the premature death of jobs, finances, health, relationships, more specifically families, self-esteem, and those are just to name a few. I'm sure you have your own list of things that died prematurely based on your behavior, or some of the things they were near death and your recovery was able to resuscitate them or resurrect them. But what's on your list? Again, I've got jobs, finances, health, relationships, families, self-esteem, maybe a spiritual connection with the God of the religion of your childhood, right? Maybe it affected you even how you looked physically, right? So when we talk about health, we talk about weight, right? Have you ever really seen a meth addict? After addiction really sets in, or if you saw me when I ballooned up to 400 pounds with my eating disorders, so there's so many things that are going on with us, and we are causing it, right? And so what is suicide? Suicide is death by self, right? And we are the ones who are perpetuating the negative results in our life. No one else did it, right? I remember driving with my mom, and my dad had been passed away by this time, and I was in Las Vegas visiting her, and I remember driving in the car with her, and I was talking to her about where I was doing and how well I was going, and all the things that were going on in my life. And she said, Bobby, I'm really sorry that this happened to you. We're sorry for what we did. And I looked at my mom, and I was curious at first, but then I realized where she was going. And I said, Mom, I don't remember you and Dad ever pouring the alcohol down my throat or forcing me to take drugs. And she was, astounded. She stopped and said, well, of course we wouldn't do that. Well, I said, Mom, then you really didn't do anything to me, did you? It was me. It was my suicide. It was my self-infliction. It was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It was a self-inflicted wound, which, again, let's go back to it. Let's call it suicide. So I think Emile Durkheim in his study will fit here, because I'm going to share with you a phrase that Dr. Covey introduced me to in the mentioning of Emile Durkheim. Do you know what Amore is? Amore, they're moral beliefs that people can hold steadfastly to them. Listen to the quote here. The quote is, when mores are sufficient, laws aren't necessary. When mores are insufficient, laws or rules are unenforceable. Again, when mores or moral beliefs, when they are sufficient, you don't need a law or a rule. When they are insufficient, there's not a rule or law out there that's going to cause them to be abided to. Dr. Durkheim used the word superfluous or needless, right? So if I'm not going to live a law and I'm going to disregard it, in terms of the moral belief, then there's not a law out there that's going to get me to adhere to it. And addiction is the same way. According to Merriman-Webster, Amore is the fixed, morally binding customs of a particular group. The fixed, morally binding customs of a particular group. Now, before I came to the change I'm now undergoing in my personal recovery, I had no morality that bound me to a set of principles or norms. How about you? Did you have anything that really bound you where day in and day out you made a daily commitment to getting those things done? I doubt if you did. If you did, then why did we end up where we ended up? We might have hit them occasionally, right? But doing the right thing every now and then is more of a convenience rather than a commitment, wouldn't you say? Because if I'm really committed and I really believe that what I'm doing is harmful, then I need to make a commitment to that other type of behavior that's going to allow me to get better over a period of time. So let me go ahead and rephrase the quote to better apply to us as a people of recovery. Remember, when mores are sufficient, laws are unnecessary. When mores are insufficient, laws are unenforceable. In other words, when I have adopted the rules, guidelines, or directive or direction associated with the plan I'm working, I really don't require outside pressure to perform or conform to it. I just sort of self-actualize and I make my commitment, and I just do that as I would tell my children. We do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, right? I have a guideline, I have a more, I have a set of principles that I know I need based on my previous condition, And even though support and comfort is good to have, it's really not necessary when it comes to my journey, right? So on the other hand, when I reject the same, rules and guidelines or direction associated with any given plan, then no amount of external pressure or coercion is going to be effective. It might be effective in the short term, but if you've got a wound that's bleeding out, unless you fix it from the core, unless you go in and surgically repair it, then in order for it to not bleed, you have to apply what? You have to apply pressure. You have to apply pressure on the wound to get it to stop bleeding. And once you remove the pressure, guess what? It begins bleeding again. And the same thing here. If I'm rejecting the guidelines or the rules or the mores, the societal norm, the custom of a particular group, then I'm just bleeding out and I require external pressure to stop bleeding, but I'm still not fixed. I'm still not right, because the difference is the fact that I'm not bleeding is coming from external pressure or coercion rather than an internal commitment to a particular way of doing things. Does that make sense? I hope that it does. It certainly does for me. Years ago, and I was fairly new to recovery. I was probably 7 or 8 months along the way, still certainly within my first year, still considered myself a newcomer when it came right down to it. And I remember I had this friend, and I don't remember her name, but I remembered this instant, this moment. And we were friends, and we'd go to meetings together. And one night, I saw her, and she had driven by the club, and she was with a couple people in the car, and I said, hey, where are you going? What are you doing? The people she was with didn't really look that familiar to me. And so I said, hey, what's going on? And she said, well, I'm just out and about, and I think I'm going to go drink. And I said, well, why would you do that? That doesn't make sense to me. Why don't you come in and we'll go to a meeting? And she said no and started to tell me what else she was going to do. And so I started giving her all the reasons that she should come in. I tried to help remind her of the morally binding customs of our 12-step group. I tried to reintroduce her to the mores or to the guidelines, the code that we agreed upon, that God could and would if he were sought. That we needed to clean house, that we needed to take these steps, that we needed to follow that path. Because remember, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And I wanted to remind her of the binding custom that she morally agreed to be a part of our group. Again, that's Merriman-Webster's definition translated for you and me in recovery. So I got to the end of all of that, and every one of those things that I suggested to this person, she rejected. And then finally, I said, then why don't you just go get drunk? And she said, I think I will. And they drove off. And I don't know if she did or she didn't. I do remember I never saw her again. But there was nothing there. There was no moral commitment. There was no moral binding. So whatever pressure that was on her to perform or conform, she no longer thought it was worth it, no longer thought the payoff, no longer thought the external pressure or conditions that were placed on her were sufficient to bring about her recovery. Again, when mores are sufficient for you and me, right? We know that we have a binding custom that is making us feel better about who we are, about where we're going, about what we're doing, about what we're becoming. That binding custom is sufficient. Then we don't need an outside reminder of why we need to do this. Internally, we know. Internally, we say, sign me up. The daily reprieve I'm given contingent on my maintenance of spiritual conditioning is sufficient for me to say, I want another day. And if you're this person who went out drinking that night, and again, I suspect she did, because it was only until I came into that agreement with her that she even left. There's no amount of external pressure or coercion that's going to last enough or be deep enough for you and me to say that's sufficient, because they will never be effective. Laws are unenforceable. The results of my behavior will not cause me to change, because eventually they won't mean anything, because I haven't made that internal commitment. I haven't made it. I hope you have. Are your mores sufficient? Do you have a fixed moral binding or a custom with a particular group or your higher power, something that is causing you to feel an internal, spiritual, mental, emotional, and even physical obligation to live a particular way? I mean, don't take it from me. Take it from Emile Durkheim, the father of sociology, who understood the sociological effects of suicide. And our old behavior is a form of suicide, because it is in self-inflicted death in the areas of our jobs, our finances, our health, our relationships, our family, our personal and spiritual self-esteem. These things matter, and I hope they matter to you. And in this time of challenge, of concern, of not being able to be close physically to the person that you would like to be close to because of these social distance restrictions, let's find another way to be grounded while we're waiting to have this added. Because in reality, we still have each other. We just don't have each other in the same physical sense that we enjoyed. We now have to dig deeper to find who we really are and what we're really about. And I guarantee you that if you make this commitment to your mores, to your morally binding custom or agreement, if you do that, then when we get through this all, and we will get through it, the amount of strength and determination and reliability that you will have will allow you to go through anything in life. Anything, because you have weathered this storm, and you have found out that you can be morally binded to a custom of a particular group. And whatever group you're involved with, whatever journey and path, the LDS church, the evangelical church, the Catholic church, the Buddhist recovery way, you name it, AA, NA, OA, GA, whatever path you're on, you have a morally binding custom that group goes by to make sure that from the inside out, we can do this. Because if if these mores, if this binding agreement is not sufficient, we will relapse. And whether it was my life or the lives of other people that I've seen relapse, they are devastatingly destructive because the majority of people who relapse never find their way back. Remember that. I also want you to remember, especially if you're new or relatively new, and I shared this with some people in a Zoom meeting last week at Annie's house. I told this one person, I said, just remember that your last drunk or high could literally be your last drunk or your last high. I think the difference is those of us who find ourselves sufficient mores or sufficiently binding to a custom of a group, then no matter what goes on around us, the road might be rocky, but we'll never get off the path. This is a journey worth taking. This is a time worth fighting for and finding out who we are and what we believe and how we can believe it stronger. And then once we've formulated that message in our heart and our mind, and we can learn to articulate it either verbally or through social media or through an embrace, a personal encounter, we can be the encouragement of the next person. And anytime I can encourage you, I guarantee you, I am encouraged. So go check out my stuff. I know you're listening to my podcast on one of the podcast channels. Also know that all my blogs and all my podcasts are available on recoveryguy.org. Share it with a friend. Comment. Let me know how we can more assist you between Jane and John and JJ and myself. We are the Recovery Guy team, and this is a movement worth being involved with. Thank you for your time today, and I hope your mores are sufficient. My name is Robert, and I am the Recovery Guy.